Over to you, Chair.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Good evening to you. Good day, depending on your time zone. And welcome to tonight's masterclass hosted by Society of Crop Agribusiness Advisors of Kenya. We are so excited to be back. It's been, I think, a while. This is our third season of masterclass, and we are excited that you have made time to join us, even as we undertake a very, very interesting topic looking at matters around food and nutrition security with a very able presenter and speaker, resource person. So just to give us a quick background, for those who may be new to the SOCA Masterclass, this is brought to you by Society of Crop Agribusiness Advisors of Kenya. It's a membership-based organization for advisors in the crops value chain. And when I say advisors, our membership includes those who provide advisory services around input, production inputs, around agronomy and actual production practices, around nutrition, around harvest, post-harvest handling, market access, compliance, and also the ancillary services such as finance and insurance for agriculture. So if you fall in that bracket, you are most welcome to inquire further on how you can be part of us and be part of this network, even as we strive to contribute to the improvement of our agricultural sector.
I think, Ricky, we are losing you. We've lost you.
Combining her knowledge of the agricultural sector as an agricultural economist, and also having practiced in a diverse range of private companies. She has a wealth of knowledge, and she's definitely well suited for moderating of tonight's session. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Nekesa, who will introduce our main presenter and the topic for tonight. We look forward to healthy engagement with you. Please share the invite to a friend, and it's not too late to have more people joining us as we kick off. Welcome, Nekesa.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ricky Aguda. So good morning, good evening, and good afternoon from wherever you're listening from. Ladies and gentlemen and advocates for the sustainable future, welcome to today's masterclass. We are addressing food loss and food waste, and specifically touching on aflatoxin, which has been really a big issue in Kenya and probably other areas in Africa, and where most smallholder farmers are practicing agriculture. We are pleased to have you join us as we delve into one of the most pressing challenges of our time, the staggering loss and waste of food along the entire supply chain. In a world where millions still go to bed hungry and our planet grapples with the consequences of climate change, it is essential that we address the issue of food loss and waste with the utmost urgency. And just recently, we celebrated the International Day of Awareness of Food Loss and Waste. That's on the September 29th, recognizing the fundamental role that sustainable production plays in promoting food security and nutrition. The statistics we have show that approximately 30% of the food we have globally is lost or wasted, which amounts to about 1.3 billion metric tons, and this is from FAO and WFP, where if total, this is about $1 trillion that is lost. This loss not only threatens food security, but also exacerbates environmental and economic challenges. Our collective commitment to reducing food loss is not just moral obligation, but a strategic imperative for building a more sustainable and resilient future. We believe that it's crucial to bring together experts, innovators, policymakers, passionate individuals who share a common vision. A world where every grain is valued and our resources are utilized wisely. In today's masterclass, we explore an innovative solution towards reducing food loss and waste due to aflatoxin, improving food safety, and safeguarding the livelihoods of those who spend and depend on agriculture for sustenance and income. Over the course of this masterclass, we will hear from our expert in the field, who will share insights, experience, and the latest research findings. We therefore look forward to your participation throughout the session. Feel free to post your questions in the Q&A section of the chat, as well as interact with us on our social media handles at Soccer Advocacy on Twitter, on X, now it's called X, and also on Facebook at the Society of Proper Business Advisors. I would like then to introduce our speaker for today, Madam Jane Wanza Kamau. She is a commercialization and agribusiness manager for Aflatoxin, whose core responsibilities is to develop strategic business relationship with the public and private sector, essential for scaling out Aflatoxin, the most promising solution for the management of aflatoxins. Jen has over 20 years of working experience in the private sector and international development. She holds a Master's of Business Administration degree and a BSc in Agriculture and Home Economics, in addition to several professional trainings in market research, food and nutrition, and commodity trading. Thank you, and let us get started. Over to you, Madam Jane.
Thank you, Teresa. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. First and foremost, I'd like to say thank you so much to the organizers of this session, the SOCA Secretariat, for giving me a chance to speak to you tonight about this topic. And so I'm sure I have a few of my colleagues joining in. We shall do this together. So Nekesa has done a good job of introducing me. I will not go into that detail. However, I speak to you about aflatoxin because of an opportunity I was given by the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture to lead the commercialization of Aflatoxin, the most formidable solution against aflatoxin. We shall see how. So I'll be addressing you looking at food losses and food waste from the angle of aflatoxin. So let's get started. I hope you can all see my screen, the secretary to let me know if anything is off. So let's start by first understanding or having a common understanding of aflatoxins. A lot of times I've come across many people who have either never heard or heard and not known what it is. And simply, like the name suggests, this is a toxin. This is a poisonous compound that is produced by fungi. And the specific species is the Aspergillus species. And aflatoxins naturally occur on the crops as they grow in the farm. For many years, a lot of times, it has been thought that aflatoxin is a post-harvest problem because it's often at the point of trade that a trader or a buyer will pick a sample and test and tell the farmer, oh no, this has aflatoxin. So the farmer tends to hear of it at the point of sale, which is more post-harvest. However, knowing that their Aspergillus is naturally occurring in the soils, in the debris on the farm, research has clearly shown that contamination begins in the field. It's only exhibited in storage. So that is a very important background for all of us to have, because that then informs us in terms of how then do we control it. I'd like to just bring your attention to various pathways through which we can get to consume aflatoxin contaminated foodstuffs. It's often been associated with maize or sorghum, groundnuts in some cases. So by directly consuming those grains, and you know, these are common staples in this region, not just in Kenya, but in the entire Africa, directly consuming your ugali or posho meal or porridge, if the base grain, whether maize or sorghum, is contaminated, then that means then you're ingesting food that is contaminated and you're likely to suffer from aflatoxicosis. Sadly so is that most of our baby foods are cereal-based. And so you can imagine what happens to the little ones when we feed them on weaning foods that are contaminated. That means they also now suffer the same effects. Sadly also is that research has shown, and there's a particular study that was done in one region of Kenya, that is in Meru, it showed that mothers who consumed contaminated food, aflatoxin was traced in the breast milk. So even when the babies are still very young, not consuming any weaning foods, there's still a high likelihood of them getting aflatoxin into their system, mainly through breast milk, because the mother has consumed stuff that is contaminated. The other way we get to suffer aflatoxicosis is through when we feed our livestock contaminated grain. It's sad to say, and I hope you have some feed experts here, it's sad to say that for farmers, when they look at their grain and it's not conforming, maybe it was rained on in the field or it was put in the store, it's wet, and so it gets molded. Because they know no trader will buy it, they're likely to feed it to their livestock. Now, the livestock just becomes a conduit of passing the same aflatoxin to you and me, whether through the milk or through the eggs, stuff that we feed our babies. So looking at these pathways of contamination, we are all at risk. For as long as we are eating, we are all at risk. And therefore, aflatoxin should be everybody's concern. Everybody's concern, not just grain farmers, not just millers, not just kebs, all of us, because we consume food and our diets are heavily cereal-based. Now, let's look at the economics of aflatoxin, because this is now the big picture and a very sad picture, because the impact of aflatoxin is often not direct to the eye. It's not directly felt, but it's so significant because when you think about it, we are having so many cases of cancer, and especially liver cancer in Africa. And studies have been able to show clearly, beyond any reasonable doubt, that consumption of contaminated food leads to over 30% of the liver cancer cases in Africa. This is a study that was done by the Partnership for Aflatoxin Control in Africa, an AU function. And you can imagine, even in this space of Africa where we don't get very clear record in the hospital space with regards to which cancer and the likely causes, they were still able to find sufficient data to prove this. This is significant because of the health burden that comes from as a result of aflatoxin. As far as trade and the economy is concerned, it is so sad that when you go to the markets, pick samples from the markets. Hello, can you see my screen? Seem to have lost it. Okay.
Yes, there. Yes, we can see it, Jen.
When you go to the markets and sample foods there, over 40% of the commodities in our markets do not conform to the non-aflatoxin standards. Now, the worst case related to what Nekesa just told us at the beginning, the issue of we are having so many hungry people in Africa, and yet a significant amount of food is being lost from the system because of aflatoxins. You can imagine 100 million worth of because nobody was going to buy your contaminated groundnuts or contaminated cereals for that matter. So this is a very significant problem, and a hidden one for that matter, because it's not shouting to your eye and you can see it. On the extreme end of my presentation, you can see headlines in the local newspapers across the region. Kenya banning exports from Uganda, imports from Uganda, Rwanda tightening up its borders, everybody saying we don't want contaminated stuff, is because this is not just a Kenya problem. It's a big problem, not just in the region, not just in Africa, across the world. And therefore, it really warrants our attention. Over the years, because aflatoxin is not new, my first encounter with aflatoxin goes way back to, I think, 2006, and it's still a problem till today. Many solutions have been found. Different experts from different quarters have started doing and answering the question, what can we do to control aflatoxin? And so everything from drought tolerant varieties or all the way to better crop agronomics. This first set of about 5 up to the ridges, those 5 activities have been highly advocated for in the past, because one thing that has been known is that a stressed crop is highly susceptible to aflatoxin. But still, the problem has persisted. So more technologies came in, oh, the maize was wet, oh, the groundnuts were damp, it was raining during harvest, and all the drying solutions, sorting and grading, better storage, hematic bags, metal silos, everything was further developed. But the problem still persisted. And so as a result of having a lot of contaminated grain, other solutions on how then can we reduce the aflatoxin content in the grain, the nixtamalization, which is one of the technologies, use of ammonia to clean up the grains, toxic scrub, all these things have come over time. But the problem still persists. So which tells you that all these solutions, while they work to a given degree, not a single one can work on its own. We need a multiplicity of solutions across the value chain, from the farmer end to the consumer end. Because even how you store your flour in the house determines whether it's going to stay safe or the fungus that was already therein is going to grow to poisonous levels. It is with this understanding that IITA and partners began looking for what else can we do to really prevent aflatoxin contamination. And that led us to biocontrol. Why? The fungus is naturally occurring. It's in the soil, it's in the debris. The crops automatically will come into contact with the fungus. And so biocontrol is a very simple intervention where we use Aflasif, apply it in the field, and this kind of provides protection for the crop at the very critical stage of flowering. I'll discuss more about that later. That prevents the entry of the fungus right from the word go. So prevention, coupled with all these other solutions, works best. So that's how, together with partners, adopting, and especially from the USDA, United States Department of Agriculture, and other partners, we have worked together to develop this solution called Aflasif. So dealing with aflatoxin, let's take it home clearly that not a single solution works on its own. It's a combination of solutions throughout the value chain of the affected crops, namely maize, sorghum, groundnuts, simsims, sunflower. Oilseeds are particularly at risk, especially because of the high moisture level that they tend to have even in their dry form. So just to emphasize my earlier message is that it takes effort from all stakeholders along the value chain to do it right from the farm management practices, all the way to the post-harvest handling, all the way to the manufacturing able to protect our food. So all these practices are required, and both private, public partners have a role to play. So let me dig a bit into how aflatoxin biocontrol works. So I've already said that the fungus that causes aflatoxin is naturally found occurring in the soil, in the farm debris, on the grains themselves. So what happens is in the normal field situations, this fungus, like any other element, just waits for ideal conditions. What are ideal conditions? High humidity, high moisture, good temperature, and it just grows. And it grows very, very fast. While the same levels of aflatoxin you find approved by various standards authorities across the world range from 0 to 20 parts per billion, while in the Eastern Africa countries, it's 10 parts per billion for human food. I think you can go up to 20 for livestock. We have seen contamination levels as high as 48,000 parts per billion, 3,000 parts per billion. I mean, this is just outright poison. And no wonder then that aflatoxin tends to exhibit itself in form of when a family eats a meal, it's supper, they go to bed, and some of them don't wake up. Or tomorrow's people are so suddenly sick, and we are seeing that a lot in several quarters where we have a lot of diet-based systems, because this problem is quietly sitting in the grains that we are consuming. It's not shouting to our eyes. In the past, we thought that modes indicated aflatoxin. Not all modes are aflatoxin. You can have grain as white as snow, and yet it's contaminated to lethal levels. So understanding that is very important, because you cannot test aflatoxin by looking at the grain with your eye. So now back to the field situation. So what happens is the fungus with the ideal conditions grows and multiplies. And these conditions tend to coincide with just when the crops are about to flower. If you look at the maize on this photograph, this maize is just towards tasseling. And it's at this point that the fungus then colonizes the crop, enters the flower, and finally enters the product of that flower. And that's how, when we are testing for aflatoxin, we do not collect the maize only in the store. We collect it in the field. We collect soil samples, we collect the crop while it is dry, but in the field, because this is where you're able to trace the genesis. Was there any contamination in the field? And that starts alerting you about what is likely to happen if storage conditions are not optimal. So always remember, the condition is in the field first. The contamination begins in the field. For groundnuts, the same thing. So just a quick explanation of what is the ideal situation. In a normal field, the aflatoxin producing aspergillus will be the dominant aspergillus in any crop field, because it's stronger, it's more vibrant, it multiplies very fast. So in any given field situation, represented by the red dots, is the aflatoxin producing aspergillus. But in the same field, we have non-aflatoxin producing aspergillus, represented by the green dots. So the question is, how can we increase the population of the green dots, the non-aflatoxin producing aspergillus in this field? Because understanding that in every given environment, there's an optimum level of any fungus that can exist. So the biocontrol process allows us to increase the green and suppress the growth of the red. And that's how we protect the crop. So, sorry. So for how then do we make Aflasafe? Because remember, we want to increase the non-toxin producing aspergillus in the field. So we begin by collecting soil samples, collecting debris on the farm, collecting crop samples, whether it's maize or groundnut, and from it isolating the fungus that is in that and establishing which are aflatoxin producing and which are non-toxin producing. And this is mainly based on their genetic makeup. And then once we isolate and get the non-toxin producing, in any environment, you find different strains of the non-toxin producing, just like you find different strains of the toxin producing. So we select the most commonly occurring, highly adaptable, highly competitive of the non-toxin producing aspergillus. and multiply them in a lab situation until we are able to get a good concentration of a spore suspension of the non-toxin producing aspergillus. We usually make a combination of 4. Why a combination of 4 and not 1? Is because we understand in any given country, there are different agroecological zones, there are different soils. And so we want that we have a product that can cater for the entire country, all the agroecological zones and across all sorts of crops. That's why we combine. So how then do we get this non-toxin producing in spore suspension to the field, which is now mainly the inoculant containing the non-toxin producing aspergillus? We coat it onto sorghum, the usual sorghum, the white sorghum. We cook it a bit, give it a heat treatment, because we do not want the sorghum to create a weed situation for the farmer. So because you don't want it going to grow on the farm, you know, once you cook it a bit, then it doesn't grow. Give it a heat treatment, cool it off, then coat the spore suspension onto this in a normal seed treater, seed coater. And we realize that when we add in a polymer, it improves the stickability of the spores onto the grains. In addition, we introduced a blue color for 2 reasons. Number 1, to differentiate it. Once it's coated onto this and it's dyed blue, then even an ordinary farmer, anybody coming across this will know this is not food, because food grain for sorghum looks different. But also the other reason for this is because the blue color is blind to the bird's eye. So once it's applied onto the field, it's unlikely that birds will pick it up and eat it out, because we want it to remain in the field and sporulate in the field. To produce Aflasafe commercially, we have now Aflasafe factories looking at producing Aflasafe in tons and making it available to the farmers. So this factory has a roaster, a coater, and a packing line, just very similar to what you'd see in an ordinary seed company. You apply Aflasafe by broadcasting on the farm 2 to 3 weeks before the crop flowers. So the maize on the photograph is the ideal stage. And what we advise farmers is, as you plant varieties, know which variety you have planted. About 40 days from planting is the ideal time. So we'll usually work with the farmers to check out on their varieties and better estimate the right stage for applying. There's a reason why we apply it at this stage. Remember, I said that the fungus is naturally occurring in the field. By the time the crop is at this stage, these are optimum conditions for growth of anything, including the aflatoxin producing aspergillus. And so by applying it 2 to 3 weeks before flowering, you are influencing this environment, increasing the population of the non-toxin producing aspergillus, so that by the time the plant flowers, the environment is clean. It just has a higher population of the non-toxin producing aspergillus, and therefore reduces the likelihood of any aflatoxin thereafter. For groundnuts, it's at the flowering, just 2 to 3 weeks before flowering. Groundnuts, most varieties have an early flowering where you just see a few flowers sporadic across the farm. Then about 2 weeks later, boom, flowering. So in that space is when we advise groundnut farmers to apply. So it's just applied by broadcasting. 2 things about this product. Remember, we have isolated the aspergillus from the soil, from the debris, from the crop. So it's naturally occurring in the environment. This is a very safe product. Remember, we are using the non-toxin producing aspergillus. So even according to the WHO rating, this product has a green band because it's very safe. And so farmers can just broadcast it by hand and wash their hands. So we have done a lot of field trials across countries, and the product works perfectly. And the difference between product that has been treated with Aflasafe and product that is not treated, even just across fields, of course, with respect to the proper separation of the treated and control fields, has been so significant, as the data there can see. And this is the data we've seen across Africa. The results are almost immediate with your immediate crop. And so we highly advocate for this. So that's how you apply by broadcasting. Now, when you broadcast, the Aflasafe will fall on the edge, the crop is still, the ground is still moist, there's probably still a lot of rain. In contact with moisture, there's the grains, those sorghum grains that were blue, remember they were already coated with the spores, they begin to grow. And so these spores are spread by wind, are spread by you and I as we walk through the field. And this is what provides protection for the crop. Aflasafe, we apply 4 kilograms per acre or 10 kilograms per hectare. These are optimum numbers. We have tested very many different combinations, and we've realized that this is what works best. Something very important, it is the spores that protects the crop. And so we need to ensure that the Aflasafe is applied after the farmers have finished weeding, top dressing. They're not doing any more work on the farm because we need this Aflasafe grains right on the surface so that when they sporulate, it's these spores that colonize that environment. So we advise that when farmers have finished all those operations, now apply your Aflasafe and let it sporulate. This process will take anything between 3 to 7 days. And when you walk through the fields, you'll be able to see grains looking like the one here with spores growing on it. This tells you that the product is active and it's working. So apply by broadcasting. So when you broadcast Aflasafe, this is you influence the situation. In short, you have increased the population of the non-toxin producing aspergillus. So we have done this work for many years, and therefore across countries. As we speak, there are 17 products of this nature registered across countries. We can see that we have among the very early products from Arizona Cotton Research. This was a product developed with the support of USDA, and the product from which we leveraged a lot of support from USAID and USDA as we were developing the Aflasafe for Africa. So AF36 is a product you will find in the US, and you can see the common crops across which it is used. So as I tell you, aflatoxin is just a problem for Africa, it's everywhere. Syngenta also has a product in the US called Aflagard, using the same technology. And in Italy, Pioneer has the same for maize. So you can see across the world, aflatoxin is a problem. Now, the unique thing that IITA has done is produced Aflasafe for Africa. We've been able to work in 10 countries so far and developed products for those countries. It's because the isolation of the fungus has to be done in that country. We have to work with what is present in that country. You cannot bring in from another country. It may not be the very particular strain. And so the first product, we registered it in Nigeria, and we're still ongoing. Actually, very soon we'll be registering a product in Uganda and many others, about 10 coming up. So out of the 17 products, 14 have been registered to IITA. And this is to mean that in all these countries, and especially considering cross-border trade, Aflasafe in all these countries, so that whatever we are trading across borders, and especially maize and groundnut and sorghum, that the food even coming from other neighboring countries is safe. So this is already market-ready product, already at commercial stages. So to produce Aflasafe at scale, we need partnerships. IITA, we are researchers. We do not have the capacity, neither do we have all the expertise we need in-house to be able to scale out commercially. So this is at the point at which we partner with private sector and with public sector as well, governments and national agricultural research institutions. So for example, in Nigeria, we've partnered with a private company, Harvest Fields Limited, and they're one of the largest agrochemicals company. This is their factory, and they produce Aflasafe for Nigeria there. They also serve the region. They serve Ghana, they serve Burkina, because they have quite a large installed capacity. The same for Senegal, is one of our earlier factories, serving also other countries in the region. Kenya here, we have the factory at Karo Katumani. As you go into Makueni, the red roof you see just at the gate for Karo Katumani, that's the Aflatoxin factory there. And we have very large capacity there, 10 tons per day. So we can be able to produce for other countries in the region. We also have another company in Tanzania with a private company, A to Z Limited, producing from Arusha. And we have a fifth company now coming up in Mozambique. So this is already showing the interest that we have gotten from private sector in terms of scaling this product. So what we do is transfer the technology to them. We have an agreement on how we support what our various responsibilities. They invest and make the product readily available across the countries. So far, what have been our successes? We have 14 products registered across 10 countries. Why 14? Because in some countries, we have registered 2 products. Then we have development of more Aflatoxin products going on in 10 countries. Remember I said we isolate the fungus, the non-toxin producing fungus in the country. So that's why they're country specific. We hope that in future we'll look at regional or across country products. We have 5 manufacturing plants. As I've said, Mozambique is coming up, over 6 million invested by private sector in Aflatoxin manufacturing and distribution. And this is significant because these are resources IITA we did not have. This technology would have just sat on the shelf until we reached out to private sector to come and take up this solution and scale it out. And this is the best product demonstration of how research should work. We have more than 9 actually investment partners, because what happens in some countries, we may not have a manufacturing plant like in Malawi, for example, but we have a distributor who is able to get the Malawi product manufactured for him by Tanzania, but availing it in Malawi, using the strains for Malawi. So far, over 5,000 tons of Aflatoxin have been sold and applied. We are very keen on this. It's not just sales. We want to see it applied because this is what gives us the safe food. And remembering at 4 kgs per acre, that covers about 1.25 million acres. Over 1 million tons of aflatoxin safe grain have been produced from these fields that have been treated. And this is a moving number because every season we have more farmers using it, more countries coming on board. So the numbers are growing. This is what we've been able to achieve. It's just a dot compared to the area under production for maize, groundnut, and sorghum in this country. And so we seek partnerships, and we are considering that all of you on this call will be ambassadors for Aflatoxin going forward. So there are various issues that are necessary for proper scaling out, uptake of a technology like this. Remember, this is a science-based product. Many people do not understand this kind of products. And so we consider it that it is so important that we have partnerships across board to ensure success, a successful uptake of such products. So first and foremost, the product development, because the product has to be available in the country. For us, an ideal situation is that we are able to develop the product with the local agricultural research institutions for the country. In Karo, we work with, in Kenya, we work with Karo, in Tanzania with TARI, in Uganda with NARO, and the same thing goes on and on in all the other countries, the national body for research in the country. And we work again with partners to scale the production. We hope that the farmers understand aflatoxin and therefore demand the product, and industry is committed to buying safe products. That's an ideal situation. But we know this is not what happens. You find one thing is here, the other one is not there. So this requires very good political will. Enforcement of food standards is in the hands of the Bureau of Standards of the respective countries. And so if they do a good job, it helps ensure that there is clean food for everyone. And so political stability, political support, proper policies are necessary to ensure that we are producing safe food for all. Purchasing power is critical. Remember, Aflasafe is not a free product. It is produced commercially. It is sold to the farmers. While we do our best through our agreements to keep the product reasonably costed. In Kenya, for example, we are talking about 4 kgs per acre. A farmer needs about 804 shillings, which is equivalent to $8 or thereabout, or slightly less. So that means that the farmer must have the ability to buy the product. However, sometimes the farmers do not have the ability. So how do we make the product available and accessible to these farmers? This is why we appeal to national governments, the input subsidy programs. Please make Aflasafe available to any farmers producing maize, groundnuts, or sunflower or sorghum. And we have classic examples of companies that have even stepped into this space. In Kenya, for example, East Africa Maltings, the raw material arm for East Africa breweries, makes Aflasafe available free to all their sorghum farmers so that they can meet their aflatoxin standard. And you're calling on private sector, especially in other value chains like groundnut and maize, to do the same so that this product is available. And think about it this way, that when the farmer uses it on their sorghum, it is on the same farms that they are growing their maize, and therefore the household food safety is even further enhanced and guaranteed. Infrastructure is necessary to reach all this, and then the extension support, because farmers first and foremost have to begin from a point of understanding the problem of aflatoxin and then what to do. And remember, I said it's not Aflasafe alone, it's all the other good practices. So somebody has to be there supporting the farmers and training them and ensuring that they adhere to all these things. So optimum conditions, we've got to find a way, one way or another, of creating them, but there are significant challenges in very low awareness of aflatoxin. Many, I'll tell you, very many, especially the non-commercial farmers, are not aware unless where they have had an incident. Then also the enforcement of the standards has been a bit erratic. One time people are very strict, other times people are not as focused. And particularly, they may say, I may speak about something. In a season like this, we are looking at the most productive season in the lower eastern block of this country, which we already know that's an aflatoxin belt. And in the past, when there was El Nino, that is a region that had a bumper harvest. And the saddest thing is that with that bumper harvest came an equally high levels of aflatoxin in those grains, because either farmers were harvesting under wet conditions or they did not have proper storage. There was no ample sun to dry. And so we need to be aware in seasons like this, and I'm speaking to my colleagues here who could be sitting in those quarters of those county governments or the national government advising on how do we reduce waste from the expected bumper harvest from the El Nino rains. We need to pay attention to aflatoxin so seriously. COVID-19 really disrupted everything. And as we all know, many countries and many families are still beginning to recover from the impacts of COVID-19. However, things are good, and we are hoping that there being no more of restrictions that came with COVID-19, we'll be able to sail through and have a good season. So what are the benefits of Aflasafe and basically aflatoxin control? Is that we ensure safe consumption of food for everyone. Everyone, remember, we are all at risk. Trade is able to happen properly because countries have standards for aflatoxin that they allow for the commodities that are sold into their countries. So we have smooth trading, whether cross-border, nationally, regionally, internationally. We are talking here about reducing food losses. Aflatoxin pulls away food from the system. Actually, this is so destructive because you can imagine all the seed, fertilizer, rain, labor, everything that has been used to produce that food, and then at the end of it, it's food that nobody can consume. This is a total loss. So aflatoxin is a major contributor to food losses, and we need to really have concerted efforts addressing it. Livestock productivity is drastically affected by contaminated feed. And like I said earlier, contaminated grain is not to be fed to livestock. And so as we look at human food, let's also engage our colleagues in the feed sector. They need to adhere to aflatoxin standards. There should not be the market for contaminated grain. Then farmers have no motivation to produce clean grain. So, sorry, a point I would not like to miss, and especially this relates to groundnuts. In the region, we are seeing a growth in the industries producing a lot of the ready-to-use therapeutic or supplementary foods. Most of those foods are heavily protein-based, and the protein of choice is often groundnuts. But a lot of those companies are importing groundnuts from Malawi, India, Argentina, etc. Why? Because local groundnuts are hardly enough, and if they are contaminated. We are losing out on a huge market opportunity for our farmers. And this especially applies to groundnuts. There's a huge opportunity for groundnuts in terms of stimulating household incomes. So join me, colleagues, in creating awareness about aflatoxin. All the measures that I talked about, from farm all the way to the table, we need to do everything there, including advocating for AflaSafe. Testing is still a very limited, aflatoxin testing is still very expensive and often not readily accessible in the maize producing areas or groundnut producing areas. You find testing is centered in the cities. We need to decentralize this. It needs to be available at the county level. More so even with the traders, simple, quick, rapid testing kits should be made readily available. Tested, of course, we don't want kits that do not give proper readings coming into this market, but would like to have kits that work. Once we are able to produce safe grain, then I can tell you better prices for farmers, better markets, and a better situation for all of us. No one can solve the aflatoxin situation alone. We need to come together as partners, providing different solutions and advocating for all the solutions so that you have good quality food at the end of the pipeline. We've not done this alone. Across countries, we've worked with hundreds of partners. This is just representing some of them, major donors, and as well as industry, ministries of agri, ministries of trade, ministries of health. Those three ministries. And now I'm daring to add the treasury, because that's where the money comes from, especially when you look at input subsidy programs. So we are continuously engaging with many partners, anyone working in those value chains, to ensure that this information gets to the farmers and they can produce safe food for all. So thank you so much. I will stop there and take any questions. Thank you. Over to you, Teresa.
Thank you, Jen. That was quite informative. I think most of us have learned something, if not everything that you said. And one thing that I have really picked from this conversation is that for actually a product like AflaSafe to scale, you need private sector, which plays a very key role on the ground. And that feeds into some of these programs that governments in Africa bring along, where they try to, push fertilizer, push through their own means, yet leaving out private sector. So private sector really plays a very big role, and I think we must all embrace private sector in terms of rolling out some of these programs we have and some of the products that we have. But of course, looking at the policy space to ensure that also the farmer is benefiting and not being exploited at the end of the day. So if we delve into the Q&A session, there are a number of questions, some of them from Facebook, because we are streaming live on Facebook, some of them from the Q&A section. And I'll pick one, which is quite simple, and I'll tie it in with some of the questions that I had. When it comes to the smallholder farmers, because all these products are targeting the smallholder farmers. When you talk about the agtech, the agricultural innovations, who actually educates the farmers to utilize some of these products, the end consumer? And how do they even understand aflatoxin? Who takes this mandate to do that? Who pays for this? And what are the primary sources and contributing factors to aflatoxin contamination? You mentioned that it could be a white maize or fungal maize. That's how farmers used to identify. But now a white maize, very clean, can be carrying aflatoxin. How can farmers know? And also maybe just to touch on that is, when broadcasting AflaSafe, how do you do it? And does the one that lands on top of the maize how does it sporulate or not? Does it have to be inside the soil, or how is that, the science behind that? Maybe you can just pick that as we move on to the other questions.
Thank you, Nekesa, for those questions. Let me start first with the point of education. Before we engage in any country, the first thing we do is a quick, what we call a commercialization strategy. And as we develop the strategy, we are trying to seek to understand, in this country, are people aware of aflatoxin first? And what we've discovered is that there are different levels of awareness across countries depending on the situation. In countries like Kenya, where we have lost people because of aflatoxin, if you go into those areas, especially lower eastern, upper eastern, people are very aware because they have had an encounter. And other places, people have never heard about it. That's one. Two, where there are commercial traders. For example, the suppliers of WFP, they are very strict about aflatoxin. They will aggregate grain, it is tested, and before it is lifted, it's bought. And so often farmers have aggregated grain and they're told, no, this one we can't buy. Why? Aflatoxin. So how the farmer gets to know about aflatoxin. One, it could be when there are campaigns by the national government or the county governments, and these tend to only occur when there has been a problem, or when they are facing a buyer who is saying, this we can't buy. Very few, especially as you're talking about smallholder farmers, would voluntarily just pick a sample and take it for testing. And this is where we are now saying, we all come together. This is the role of the public health department, educating. And that's what the three ministries, health, trade, agriculture, must work together. It's the role of aflatoxin is a public health problem. They need to go out, the way they tell us about malaria and everything else, educating farmers on the dangers and the likelihoods of aflatoxin. And especially when we have predisposing conditions like now, we know El Nino is coming, and what that means, they've already said prolonged rain, even into harvesting. We know what that means already. It has happened in the past. So as we are planning input subsidy, as we are planning post-harvest measures, what are we doing to mitigate that problem there, or are we waiting to get to that point? And that's why for me here, I'm rallying everyone, wherever you are, even in your own household, your own community, your neighbors, sensitize them. This could be a likely problem. Let's prepare. So that's the one thing. Awareness levels are still very low, and awareness creation is very costly. This is the one area where we rally the government to support us, to support in creating awareness about aflatoxin across the country and on all segments of farmers. Large-scale farmers are usually very aware, because most of them, by the time they're being contracted by miller A or B or grain trader A or B, they're already given a parameter, quality parameters are to be tested. So they're already very aware, and you find they take action. Their systems are mechanized. They have ways of ensuring they dry quickly. They don't subject the grain to further contamination. But small-scale farmers, there's very little being done, and this is where we all come in our own different corners. Now, to the question on whether when you broadcast aflatoxin, it doesn't have to fall in the soil. For as long as, even if it's inside the maize, I have a very good photo, I'll look for it as we go on, of grain that's pollinated when it was on the leaves of the maize. For as long as it's out in the open and it's coming into contact with some moisture, it will sporulate, but just got to be in the surface. What we don't want is a farmer getting back and weeding and burying it in the soil, because then now we negate the whole purpose of that. Is that it? Is there anything else I could have?
So yes. There's another question that is coming up about policies, and I know this is quite close to my heart. When I talk about policies, I really somehow hold the smallholder farmer really at my heart, because sometimes they don't understand what policies mean, what that means to their production, and how that impacts on their production, and even probably even the interpretation of these policies. Aflatoxin contamination primarily impacts these smallholder farmers most of the times, because probably the large-scale farmers know how to prevent aflatoxin, maybe know how to use AflaSafe, might not take a lot to utilize it. What policies and support structures help vulnerable populations, especially in terms of reducing this and boosting economic resilience. And then when you talk about government and international organizations, how can they better support aflatoxin prevention, especially in the efforts for agricultural sector? And do we actually even have those policies as we speak to guide us on that aflatoxin challenge that we are facing currently?
Okay. Thank you, Teresa. The first bit on the policies is that because aflatoxin relates to food standards, there are policies. Interesting, this is a very broad and cross-cutting issues that you find in numerous policies. Some relating to agriculture, others housed in the Ministry of Health, others in trade, others elsewhere. And so in Kenya, I don't know whether it's active, but I know there's a National Food Safety Coordination Committee that is a multi-sectoral body that has been formed to discuss cross-cutting matters relating to food safety, for example, aflatoxin. And so we've engaged numerously with that committee that includes private sector, includes development partners, and all the government ministries or agencies that have to do anything to do with food safety. My only issue is that food safety issues can be many. If you start from fruits and vegetables, get to grain, go to livestock, they can be many. The danger is critical, non-visible issues like aflatoxin can easily just disappear into the mix. And so that led to, a few years back, a program that IITA was involved in with the East Africa community, and especially after the East Africa standards, grain standards were developed, which have clear aflatoxin standards stipulated there, 10 parts per billion for trade of grain across East Africa region. We developed policy briefs. And if you go to the EAC website, you will find those policy briefs. I can share them with the Secretariat later. And these were to inform governments on how to deal with aflatoxin, whether it's to do with livestock, whether it's to do with crops, whether it's in manufacturing, all spheres. We looked at how to handle it as far as smallholder farmers are concerned. And we did these policy briefs so as to inform government on how to proceed. And it was expected that member states would then, after ratifying these policy briefs, would then roll this out in their respective countries. Some did some bit of work, others are still doing. And so there's need for more urgent action around aflatoxin. Actually, let me just say, there's need for urgent action around aflatoxin. Once, because it's an invisible problem to the smallholder farmer. How then do they understand these policies and how do these policies come into effect? One of the things with the smallholder farmers, the minute you speak to anyone, not just the smallholder farmer, any consumer, even the laborer next door, if you speak to them about the safety of the food they are eating, you can remember like when I think it was NTV ran the white alert, all the noise that was on Twitter and everywhere is because people are concerned. Nobody wants to eat food that is not fit for their bodies. Everybody is concerned. And so when we speak to smallholder farmers, when they become aware, most of them have begin to address the crop they are growing, not just as some dead material. In the past, you'd see farmers just drying maize anywhere on the ground. These days, there's been a lot of improvement in that space. Farmers know that they need to use taplings. The Extension Service has worked very well in sensitizing them on good agronomic practices. Now it's on top of that that we add in the AflaSafe. To improve access to AflaSafe, especially for the vulnerable smallholder farmers, one of the things we've done is lobby the government. And now I must say that in Kenya, for example, in the input subsidy program, AflaSafe, under the Ministry of Agriculture, the Crop Protection Department, AflaSafe is included. And this is distributed through the national, from the national to the county governments, and especially focused on the high-prone counties, and made available to the farmers for free. I said earlier,
is anybody else who can hear Jen, or is it that we've lost her?
We've lost her.
Okay, as maybe she gets back online, there are a few other discussions, some points that I've picked, just from her discussion. We can probably talk through those as she gets back online, and maybe the secretariat, one person can try to reach her just in case. So as she mentions about, having the smallholder farmer on the ground, getting to understand what Aflasafe is, what aflatoxin is. I think something else that we must understand is also the extension services. Right now, they don't exist to the smallholder farmer. So it's quite critical that as we push some of these technologies, that we also push the government to, bring back extension services to for the smallholder farmers to access the information that is required so that they can understand not just the use of Aflasafe, but the use of agricultural technologies that are coming up. Jen, we're just discussing as you get back online, so you can pick it up from where you disappeared. I think at some point you disappeared. Thank you.
Yes, sorry for that. What I was saying is, yes, we are seeing the effort from government making it available. Private sector is also making it available. And now we're also appealing to development programs that are especially working on getting farmers' inputs to factor it there. Anyone working around food safety, first, let's have the discussion on aflatoxin. Let's improve awareness. Consumer groups, because if you look at the revolution to save food in the West, it came from consumers and consumer groups. We need a louder voice from consumer groups. We need a louder voice from advisors in this forum, because we advise in different quarters that we draw this attention and get people to action. Over.
Thanks, Jen. Maybe as we wind up, because time is not on our side, and it is quite an interesting discussion, I feel like breaking it up into two parts so that we have part two of aflatoxin discussion. So just looking at now what IETA has done over the years, could you please just share some of your, successes, the outcomes? I know you've given us figures, but just talking of adoption, how has it been, that journey, and especially in reduction of that aflatoxin with the smallholder farmers? Maybe you can share about that, and then give us just your parting shot as we finalize. Then yes, over to you.
Thank you. So in Kenya, for example, if I may use Kenya as an example, the work on Aflasafe in Kenya began in 2014. And this began especially in earnest after the 2004 fatalities that were caused by aflatoxin. So in 2014 is when we began developing the product. Some of our successes, number one, has been developing the product. To develop a product in any country, that work of isolating, picking debris, picking soil across all the different agroecological zones and isolating takes nothing less than 4 to 6 years. So we have a product registered by PCPB. You can check their site, fully registered, conforms like any other product to the regulation. And let me just mention something here, because I'm talking to industry experts. It is concerning that you go to PCPB to register a biological product, a natural product like Aflasafe, but you're subjected to the chemical process. It's like you're registered in a chemical process. Why? Is because we don't have standards for registering biological products. I think this is a challenge. We need to challenge them to come up with that, because this increases the costs unnecessarily. I think from what I explained of how we make Aflasafe, it's pretty clear that this is a very natural product. So that is one that we've been able, despite being subjected to chemical processes, we've been able to develop the product and have it registered. The other bit is that now we have commercial manufacturing going on. The factory at Katumani is able to produce 10 tons per day. And in our highest year in Kenya, we produced, it was, I think, close to almost 300 metric tons of Aflasafe in a single season. And so this number varies depending on the uptakers. Remember, this is a commercial process. It's not free, it's got to be sold. And so we have the potential of producing even more if the demand increases. The largest demand in Kenya, and I must say thanks to the government of Kenya, has come from the government, the Ministry of Agriculture, through the Crops Protection Department. They have bought so much Aflasafe, actually imported the initial consignment for the Galana Kulalu project, all the way from Nigeria, because the threat of aflatoxin to that project is real, even today. And so seeing a government that is interested and investing its own resources in this is another great success. In terms of uptake by smallholder farmers, it's growing. Adoption is still low. We are way low, just about 10%, because it's in sporadic spots where people have had an encounter with aflatoxin that they take it seriously. Most of the farmers are, we're not even making anything from maize, so they're not very keen. After all, even millers, most of them just buy what is available. Nobody's demanding quality. And so this is what I am coming to appeal to you, that all of us as industry professionals, wherever we work, we must drive the quality agenda. Let's just not produce anything. Let's just produce food that is safe and of good quality that we can trade anywhere. My greatest success has come from the groundnut value chain, and largely because this has been driven by processors who have said no to contaminated groundnuts. And they are leading the way by investing in ensuring their growers have aflasafe to produce aflatoxin-safe groundnuts, and investing in all the other practices required along the value chain. So my closing remark is simple. Aflatoxin is everybody's concern. If you eat food, be concerned about aflatoxin in the food that you're eating or in the food that you're producing. All of us here, I know we come from farming communities. Please spread the word. Aflasafe is now readily available in Kenya. It's distributed by Copat together in partnership with UPL. And so you find it in most of the agro dealer shops. And if you need it and you can't find it nearest to you, reach out to me, reach out to members of this group who are already leading those companies that I mentioned, either Copat or UPL, and you'll be able to know where Aflasafe would be able to be accessed. And let's apply. Let's talk to our families about this. Let's be concerned about food safety. Thank you so much to the Secretariat for the opportunity. Over.
Thank you. Now, let me just award you this title, Daktari. I know you're getting there. So thank you, Daktari, for this lovely presentation, and also just enlightening us about aflatoxin. I know there's so much that we can actually discuss in terms of knowing what aflatoxin is and how to prevent it. And this is something that can disrupt food trade and value chains. And when we talk about value chains, we're not just sticking to maize. Maize is, yes, our main crop in Kenya, but remember, we also have cereal legumes like groundnuts, as she has mentioned, that are being affected by these aflatoxins. And this is, we eat peanut butter, we eat peanuts on the road, those people who sell to the groundnuts. So it's quite important that we actually look at, just issues around contamination of aflatoxin. So then on issues around collaboration, we need to work with collaborators to ensure that we are getting everything done with the various players in the sector, agricultural industry. Let's look at health, trade, environment, all this. It's a combination, private sector, so that we can get and combat aflatoxin contamination. And with this, we come to the end of our masterclass today, and we'll definitely have another masterclass maybe before the end of the year. And as we open the year 2024, we would like to thank you for joining us this evening, and thank the Secretariat and the Society of Corporate Business Advisor for hosting this session. Thank you so much, and have a good evening, good afternoon, or good morning from wherever you are listening from. Asante sana, danke, merci.
Are we doing postmortem? Or we have just failed to drop off?
It's still live. We need to stop the recording.
Okay.
Can someone stop the recording, please?
Vicky, kindly help us stop the recording. Winnie is host and she's not picking up.